Good morning, and welcome to the Daily News Currents. Today is Tuesday, April 29th, and for today's headlines we have: the White House threatens sanctuary cities in another EO, but courts are skeptical. Wisconsin judge arrested by FBI stood up for her community, state lawmaker says. Widespread power outage hits Spain and Portugal. A citizen lawyer gets a standing ovation at the Supreme Court. NYPD investigating pro-Israel crowd attack on woman in Brooklyn. The White House threatens sanctuary cities in another EO, but courts are skeptical. The White House says President Donald Trump is expected to sign an executive order on Monday aimed at identifying sanctuary cities, part of a broader effort to target jurisdictions that limit their cooperation with immigration authorities. The executive order will direct the Departments of Justice and Homeland Security to identify jurisdictions where local law enforcement has declined to cooperate with the Trump administration's immigration crackdown, according to White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt. It's quite simple, Leavitt says during a press briefing on Monday morning. Obey the law, respect the law, and don't obstruct federal immigration officials and law enforcement officials when they're simply trying to remove public safety threats from our nation's communities. The executive order could set the stage for more federal lawsuits against cities, states, and counties that intentionally limit their cooperation with U.S. immigration or customs enforcement. These sanctuary jurisdictions argue that collaborating with ICE would drain their resources and undermine trust between police and immigrant communities. We stand together in solidarity with our immigrant families, wrote Keith Wilson, the mayor of Portland, Oregon, in a letter to the city council earlier this year, promising the city would try to keep undocumented families safe by slowing or stopping cooperation with overreaching federal immigration enforcement. The Trump administration has also tried to withhold funding from sanctuary cities and states. During President Trump's first term, the Justice Department tried to withhold funding from several jurisdictions, but they fought back and were often able to defeat those efforts in court. Last week, a federal judge blocked the administration's latest effort to withhold funding from 16 jurisdictions, including San Francisco, Portland, Seattle, Minneapolis, St. Paul, and New Haven. Here we are again, wrote U.S. District Judge William Orrick in San Francisco, who found that the Trump administration's actions were likely unconstitutional and granted a preliminary injunction. The threat to withhold funding causes them irreparable injury in the form of budgetary uncertainty, deprivation of constitutional rights, and undermining trust between the cities and counties and the communities they serve, Orrick wrote. Wisconsin judge arrested by FBI stood up for her community, state lawmakers say. The arrest of Milwaukee County Circuit Judge Hannah Duggan by the FBI could have a chilling effect and keep immigrants away from court appearances out of fear they may be arrested, a Wisconsin state lawmaker warns. The FBI arrested Duggan last week and charged her with obstruction and concealing an individual to prevent an arrest. Duggan is accused of a criminal complaint of ushering Eduardo Flores Ruiz, who faced a misdemeanor battery charge and was living in the U.S. without legal status, through the jury door out of her courtroom to evade federal agents who wanted to arrest him with an administrative warrant. State Representative Ryan Clancy, a Democrat representing parts of Milwaukee, told Morning Edition that courthouses, like operating rooms and classrooms, have typically been protected spaces. But Clancy said the presence of immigration and customs enforcement officials in courthouses changes their nature. People who would normally be willingly participating in the justice system are now going to think twice if they think that showing up, either as a defendant or a witness, may lead to their own arrest, Clancy said. Duggan's arrest prompted protests outside the federal courthouse in Milwaukee. Beyond immigrants, Clancy also said Duggan's arrest is an effort by federal officials to scare officials and others from standing up to the Trump regime. Interview highlights. Steve Inskeep, do you agree on the basic facts that what seems to have happened here? There is a Mexican migrant in her court, that ICE agents asked for him, that Judge Duggan gets upset about this and lets him out the side door. State Representative Ryan Clancy, I think some of those facts are in dispute, and I think there is a significant difference here between an administrative warrant, which is what ICE said and admitted that they had in their complaint, which is essentially an internal document, and an actual warrant signed by an actual judge. And I am very grateful that Judge Duggan recognized the difference and acted accordingly, and she just stood up for our community here. Inskeep, you can imagine someone saying that the judge has an obligation to cooperate with law enforcement authorities, the federal authorities who appear in front of her. But you're saying that you're arguing that they may have had less than full authority to demand full cooperation from the judge. Absolutely. They do not have a real warrant signed by a real judge. Essentially, an administrative warrant from ICE is a piece of paper that they produce themselves, saying they can do what they want. It doesn't have the same powers as an actual warrant does. Judge Duggan, as a judge herself, apparently realized that and did what I hope any of us would do, which is standing up for the members of the community who are being targeted by the Trump regime. Can you tell me, though, what ICE should have done? They have this federal policy to deport people. That is also the law that people who are not here legally should not be here legally. They're supposed to get this guy. What should they have done? Should they have just left him in the courthouse? Should they have ignored him, tried to find somewhere else? What should they have done? Certainly. I do not think that ICE should be deporting people at all. We have done without ICE for many years, and even prior to that, there's been a long-standing tradition for good reason of not going into those safe, protected spaces. So we can debate whether or not ICE should be deporting people at all. They should not. ICE should be abolished. That said, they absolutely should not be going into courtrooms. That's a chilling effect both on people that are there to participate and also elected and appointed officials like judges, who are clearly being targeted by this administration as well. Inskeep. I want to make sure I understand what you're telling me. You're not saying ICE should not be deporting people from courts, which is a point of view. You're saying ICE should not be deporting people. Just anybody should come in here for any reason and no one should enforce the law? That's a larger issue. Certainly, we do not have a significant legal pathways for folks who want to do the right thing and want to be here and join our American society in the right way. It is frustrating for people to hear they should be doing it the right way. There are many, many people who are integrated into our communities, who are part of our communities, who are trying to do the right thing and are trying to get legal status, despite the fact that we make it really difficult at a federal level. We should not be deporting those people either, and to be very clear, ICE should not exist. ICE should be abolished. Inskeep. Are you concerned about where this is going with the judge being arrested given the circumstances? Clancy, absolutely. And this is incredibly unprecedented. A functioning democracy does not arrest sitting judges for doing their job, not for doing anything criminal or illegal. And they certainly do not, handcuff them and perp walk them in handcuffs in front of cameras. The goal here clearly is a chilling effect. It's to stop people from doing their jobs and standing up for a community when they are standing up to the Trump regime. Widespread power outages hit Spain and Portugal. The blackout hit critical infrastructure like airports and caused transportation disruptions across the two countries. The cause of the outage was unclear. Spain and Portugal were hit by a major power outage on Monday, bringing to a halt daily activity through the two countries, with businesses shutting down along with trains, subways, and airline flights. Officials did not say what caused the outage, but affected tens of millions of people across the Iberian Peninsula, but several denied any foul play. At this point, there's no indications of any cyber attack, Antonio Costa, the president of the European Council, wrote in a post on X. Portuguese energy authorities said that outage occurred following a disruption in the European grid, but did not provide details. After a report that the unspecified atmospheric phenomenon had caused the outage, REN, a Portuguese electricity and gas supplier, vigorously denied that was the reason. That news is fake news, Bruno Silva, a spokesperson for REN, said in a phone interview. It is giving us a really, really big headache. By late Monday afternoon, power was flickering back on in many areas. Spain's national power company, Red Electrica, said that power had returned to many parts of the country, including in Catalonia, Aragon, and Basque Country, Garcia, Asturias, Navarre, Castile and Leon, Extremadura, and Andalusia. The outage had previously affected France. RTE, the French electrical grid operator, said in a statement that some households in the country Basque region had briefly lost electricity, but that all power had since been restored. The effects of the disruption were felt by millions of people across the Iberian Peninsula as authorities activated emergency plans. Top Spanish officials convened a meeting of the National Security Council on Monday. Long lines started to form outside ATMs. There were widespread problems connecting to the internet and to phone networks across Spain and Portugal. Due to the power outage, we ask that you avoid driving as much as possible, the Spanish Traffic Authority wrote on a post on X. The power outage prevents traffic lights and road signs from working. Major institutions went into crisis management mode. Hospitals in Spain were forced to run on generators. Portuguese banks and schools closed. Matches for the Madrid Open tennis tournament were suspended, the ATP Tour said. Train travel was disrupted through Spain. Renfe, Spain's national rail company, wrote in a post on X that at 12:30 p.m., the entire national electricity grid was cut off, adding that trains had stopped operating at all stations. Subways in several cities, including Valencia and Madrid, were also halted. Later, the country's transportation minister, Oscar Puente, said on X that railways would remain closed all day. Joe Merritt, a professor at the University of Florida, had spent much of the day with his wife, Michelle, on a train that stopped suddenly in a rural area on the track somewhere between Madrid and Valencia. After 3 hours, he said, the dining cart was down to just beer and a few soft drinks. We are out of water, Mr. Merritt, 67, in a phone interview as he watched some riders step off the train and walk toward a tractor where a farmer was delivering water. The train staff were walking from car to car delivering news since the loudspeaker no longer worked, he said. Some flights were delayed too. ANA, which manages many Spanish airports, wrote on a post on X. EasyJet, the airline, told passengers on Monday morning that Spanish airports are currently experiencing ongoing power outages affecting multiple essential systems in airport infrastructure. The airline said it expected delays and described the disruptions as extraordinary and outside of our control. Millions of people across the region tried to deal with those disruptions while they still had daylight to spare. In Lisbon, Portugal's capital, people started racing to grocery stores to fill up on water and dried goods. Many were out of luck. Some major grocery stores were closed Monday afternoon. Smaller groceries struggled to refill shelves that were quickly emptying. At some counters, clerks were tallying bills by hand, using paper and pens as electronic scanners and cash registers were no longer working. It was like when I was younger 50 years ago, said Francisco Garcia, 61, a boat restorer living in the old part of Lisbon. For the first 30 minutes, Mr. Garcia was able to get access to news updates on his phone. Since then, the news sites have crashed, he said, leaving him in the middle of a city in crisis with no information. We are in a total blackout, he said, adding, it's a reminder of how dependent we are on things outside of our control. In Peniche, a small coastal city about 50 miles north of Lisbon, only one grocery store was still open on Monday afternoon. Dozens of people waited in front of each cashier. Elsewhere in this city, Andre Lima, 33, waited at an ATM along with about 50 other people. Mr. Lima, who works in healthcare complex for seniors, said he worried about the oxygen supply for some residents. There are people whose life depends on power supply, he said. In Marica, a city in southeastern Spain, cross signs and traffic lights went dark, though some still drove cars carefully through the streets. Teresa Garcia, 92, sat in a wheelchair outside her house around lunchtime. She was waiting for the power to return so the elevator could take her back up to her apartment, she said. At the Capilla del Apostol, Santiago, a small group of parishioners has gathered in the dark church, and altar candles were lit by people praying for those affected by the blackout, including all those trapped in elevators. People seemed to be mostly adapting to the disruption. Some had picnics in the park, restaurant terraces were full, and while the midday sunlight still shone brightly, indoor flamenco classes continued as people practiced in the light streaming in from the windows. A citizen lawyer gets a standing ovation at the Supreme Court. In a remarkable scene, the justices applauded Edwin S. Nealder, a government lawyer with a reputation for candor, care, and integrity. After a routine Supreme Court argument on Wednesday, Chief Justice John G. Roberts Jr. asked the lawyer who had represented the government to return to the lectern. You have just presented your 160th argument before the court, and I understand this is intended to be your last, the Chief Justice told the lawyer, Edwin S. Nealder, who was retiring as a Deputy Solicitor General. That is the record from Modern Times. Chief Justice Roberts talked a little more with affection and high praise, thanking Mr. Needler for his extraordinary care and professionalism. Then something remarkable happened. Applause burst out in the courtroom, and that led to a standing ovation for Mr. Needler, with the justices joining too. It was a rare moment of unanimity and spontaneous joy from all 9 justices on the branch, said Richard Lazarus, a law professor at Harvard. They were all beaming. Canon Shuremangamam, a veteran Supreme Court lawyer, said it was one of the most electric moments I've ever seen in the courtroom. The tribute to Mr. Needler's candor and integrity came against the backdrop of a different kind of courtroom behavior. In the early months of the second Trump administration, its lawyers had been accused of gamesmanship, dishonesty, and defiance, and have been fired for providing frank answers to judges. Mr. Needler presented a different model, former colleagues said. Ed is the embodiment of the government lawyer ideal, one whose duty of candor to the court and interest in doing justice, not just winning a case, always carried the day, said Gregory G. Gare, who served as Solicitor General under President George W. Bush. Mr. Shanmugam and Mr. Needler's loyalty was the rule of law. He would much rather get the law right at the risk of losing, Mr. Shagmon said, than win at the cost of misinterpreting the law. Seth P. Waxman, who was a Solicitor General in the Clinton administration, said Mr. Needler was the opposite of partisan. In all the years I've worked with Ed in the Justice Department, I did not know his politics, Mr. Waxman said. Mr. Needler joined the Office of Solicitor General, the elite unit of the Justice Department that represents the federal government in the Supreme Court in 1979, served in many administrations, and helped tutor the Solicitor Generals who came and went. I was incredibly lucky to have Ed as a deputy when I was SG. Justice Elena Kagan, who served as Solicitor General in the Obama administration, said in a statement, "There's pretty much no legal question he can't answer, and he has a bone-deep understanding of the traditions and ethos of the SG's office." She added, "I learned from him every day, and I did my job far better than because he was there. In all the time I've spent in government, I've never known a finer public servant." That was something like a consensus view among former solicitors generals. Mr. Waxman, for instance, called Mr. Needler a national treasure. Noel J. Francisco, the Solicitor General in the first Trump administration, said that Mr. Needler was not just a font of knowledge, but of wisdom. Elizabeth B. Polgar, the Solicitor General in the Biden administration, said that Ed Needler represents the very best of what it means to be a lawyer for the United States. Mr. Needler's retirement is part of a wave of departures from the Solicitor General's office, which is quite small. After the Solicitor General and the handful of deputies, there are just 16 line lawyers. About half of them are leaving, the Washington Post reported this month. Mr. Needler, 79, did not respond to requests for an interview, and received an award this month from the University of Virginia's law school, his alma mater. He said he was a career civil servant, not just in the press, if I can avoid it. At the ceremony, Mr. Needler gave extended remarks, making points that in another era might have seemed unremarkable. These days, they verge on provocative. Calling himself a citizen lawyer, he praised the many federal employees he had worked with, saying he had been impressed by their compassionate understanding for our country and dedication to our country. He said his office analyzed legal issues with rigor and care, at least in cases on the court's regular docket. Since Mr. Trump took office in January, the government has filed a torrent of emergency applications on what critics call the court's shadow docket. "When we don't have emergencies like we have a number of now," Mr. Needler said, "we have a very structured decision-making process." Leslie Kendrick, the Virginia's law school dean, asked Mr. Needler a few questions, one of which was premised on his office's commitment to providing nonpartisan representation for the United States regardless of cause, regardless of the political leadership of the other two branches. Mr. Needler did not quite adopt the premise. "We are lawyers for the United States," he said, "and the administration in office is the ultimate determiner of what the interests of the United States are." But he ended his remarks on a hopeful note. "We're all part of a process that is leading us to a more perfect union," he said, "which means a union in which we are coming together, not apart." Before the standing ovation at the Supreme Court on Wednesday, Chief Justice Roberts, himself a veteran of the Solicitor General's office, added what he called a personal note as he spoke to Mr. Needler. "I recall that on 2 occasions you and I argued on the same side here, me representing a private client and you the United States," the Chief Justice said. "We lost each of those cases. I'm sure it was my fault, Mr. Needler. Thank you for your outstanding service to court and country." NYPD investigates pro-Israel crowd attack on woman in Brooklyn. After a protest at a Brooklyn synagogue where a far-right Israeli official had spoken, a woman said pro-Israel counter-protesters verbally and physically abused her as she walked by. A Crown Heights woman said Monday that she wandered into the aftermath of the protest last week and was surrounded by a furious pro-Israel crowd that abused her verbally and physically, an episode that Mayor Eric Adams has said was under investigation. On Thursday night, pro-Palestinian demonstrators gathered outside Chabad Lubavitch World Headquarters on Eastern Parkway in Crown Heights, Brooklyn, where Itamar Ben-Gvir, the Israeli security minister, was to speak. The headquarters is an important religious site for the Hasidistic community, and intense clashes erupted between protesters and counter-protesters outside. Videos posted on social media by members of both sides show. Police officers arrived at the headquarters to quell crowds. At one point, hundreds of men and boys, most of them Jewish, surrounded a woman, according to police and videos of the episode. It was unclear what prompted them to close in around her. In a statement to the New York Times, the woman identified herself as the victim, but asked that her name not be used for fear of retribution. She said she was not involved in the protests, but had been watching with neighbors and pulled a scarf over her head when people began filming. She said she was quickly encircled by an angry crowd who shouted abuse at her and moved near a line of police officers for protection. The crowd began to chant, "Death to Arabs," in Hebrew, and followed her and an officer who begun escorting her, video showed. Many shouted racist, sexist, and anti-Arab profanities as others shoved her. At least one hurled an orange construction cone at her head before the officer was able to put her in a police vehicle, the footage shows. The woman said she was terrified as members of the crowd kicked her in the back, spat at her, and threw objects at her head. The woman said that the lone officer who steered her through the crowd, the police did not do enough to keep her safe. She said she was scared of leading protesters to her doorstep and that she was now frightened to live in her neighborhood of nearly a decade. The police department said in a statement that the officer escorting the woman saw her surrounded and pushed through the group to bring her to safety. She was taken home in a department vehicle, the statement said. In another incident, pro-Israel counter-protesters harassed a second woman who was separated from fellow pro-Palestinian protesters and injured, Mr. Adams said. 6 people at the protest were taken into custody on Thursday night, the police said. Of those, 5 were issued court summons and released, and one, Oscar Vidal, 28, of New Jersey, was charged with assault, harassment, and criminal mischief, the police said. It was unclear which sides of the protest they represented. None of this is acceptable. In fact, it's despicable, Mr. Adams said in a statement posted on X hours after the protests broke out on a Sunday near a Brooklyn synagogue where Mr. Ben-Gvir had been expected to speak. Mr. Adams urged the 2 women to aid the police investigation. Rabbi Mati Saliskan, a spokesman for Chabad Lubavitch World, said that organizers condemned the crude language and violence of a small breakaway group of young people that followed the first women. Such actions are entirely unacceptable and wholly antithetical to Torah's values, Mr. Saliskan said in a statement on Monday. The fact that a possibly uninvolved bystander got pulled into the melee further underscores the point. But he also denounced the protesters who he said had called for the genocide of Jews in support of terrorists and terrorism outside a synagogue in a Jewish neighborhood where some of the worst anti-Semitic violence in American history was perpetrated and where many residents shared deep bonds with the victims of October 7th. Several days of demonstrators preceded the visit of Ben-Gvir, whose appearances brought pro-Palestinian and pro-Israel groups face-to-face in heated exchanges and troubling episodes, some of them in Brooklyn neighborhoods with large Orthodox Jewish populations. Mr. Ben-Gvir's visit is his first official trip to the United States since March, when he rejoined the government of Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu of Israel. He has been considered a political extremist in Israel for decades because of his far-right views. He was barred as a teenager from serving in the Israel army, a rare occurrence in a country where military service is mandatory. In his home, Mr. Ben-Gvir had kept a portrait of a man who had fatally shot 29 Palestinians in 1994 at a mosque in the West Bank. On Wednesday, Mr. Ben-Gvir appeared in New Haven, Connecticut at Shabbatai, a private Jewish discussion society that is based at Yale University but not affiliated with the school. Hundreds of demonstrators gathered outside as Mr. Ben-Gvir left. Some threw water bottles at him, while others waved Israeli and Palestinian flags. On Thursday, Representative Gerald Nadler, Democrat of New York and a long-serving Jewish member of the House, appeared outside a restaurant in Manhattan where Mr. Ben-Gvir was speaking. Joined by several rabbis and Brad Lander, the city comptroller, and a mayoral candidate, Mr. Nadler announced that he would introduce legislation designed to impose economic sanctions on Israeli settlers who commit violence in the West Bank. In an interview on Sunday, he said the protests were important, even if they had little effect on Mr. Ben-Gvir himself. It's the message everyone else should take that we don't support this, Mr. Nadler said. Whatever he may say, there are major Jewish groups who are opposed to this, who support a democratic, peaceful Israel, and who are opposed to the kind of racism and violence that he represents. The Israeli consulate could not immediately be reached for comment. On Sunday morning, another protest erupted in front of the Edmund J. Safra Synagogue in Grafton, Brooklyn, according to the police and video footage. That synagogue is across the street from Congregation Sar Zion, the synagogue where Mr. Ben-Gvir was expected to speak, according to members of both synagogues. His talk, which was scheduled for around 9:30 a.m., was canceled, the members said. As word of the protest started, supporters of Israel from the neighborhood flocked to the area. At least 6 people were taken into custody, the police said. Whether they were pro-Palestinian and pro-Israel demonstrators was unclear. Stephanie Bechamel, 45, of Israeli-American woman, had heard about the demonstrations and arrived on the block to confront the pro-Palestinian activists. She was wearing a blue denim jacket with the words "Free the Hostages" and "Trump" pin on her lapel, and had a pepper spray tucked inside her pocket. At one point, she was caught in the fray and injured her left knee. "I'm fine," she said, "but it's just the point that you don't go to any house of worship in America to protest, not a house of worship." By 1 p.m., the protest had ended and the police barricades on the block had been removed. A woman carrying a pro-Palestinian sign walked her bicycle along the thoroughfare, away from the house of worship. A man wearing a yarmulke told her to keep moving. That is all for today. Thank you so much for listening. Goodbye.